Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to something a little bit different, and to be honest, welcome to the type of video that I have strenuously avoided making for the last 4 years, because even if you fall madly in love with the watch I'm going to show you, you can't buy one because it's discontinued. It's the Casio MTD 1010, aka the Casio Submariner. Now, I reckon they made these from late 1990s to maybe about 2010, so it's been discontinued for some time as well. When I reviewed the new Marlinless Marlin, the new Duro, towards the end of last year, I asked you for your thoughts, I asked you for your comments, and I got plenty of them. I wasn't disappointed. Over 2,000 comments. A lot of you asking for the same thing, a smaller version of the Duro, preferably a 40mm rather than the 44 of the current model. That got me thinking, is there anything else in the Casio range that would suffice at around 40mm? And I bought a JDM watch. I'll bring that in a little later on. Or is there anything from the Casio back catalogue at this size? Enter the MTD 1010. Now, this one is on loan to the channel. A Sydney subscriber called Phil got in touch and he said he had one. He thought it would make an interesting video. Would I like to borrow it? I think you're right, Phil. I think this is going to be an interesting video. Thank you very much indeed. So leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Is this the 40mm Casio watch that you've personally been looking for? I'll give you my thoughts over the course of the video and a few things that I think Casio would need to do to this watch to tweak it for the 2021 market. Let's get on with it. And there it is, and you can see why they refer to it as the Casio Submariner, can't you? And that's something else I've been thinking about. When this watch was released 15-20 years ago, I don't think there were nearly as many other Submariner homages, whatever you want to call them, on the market as there are today. We're at almost saturation point, I feel. Is there therefore enough room for one of these, or does the fact that it has Casio on the dial and it is a genuine reissue, does that mean it's kind of okay? Lots to consider. And when I say you can't buy this one, that's obviously not quite true. There were plenty of these made at the time and there are plenty of them still available on eBay. However, check out some of the prices. You're looking at 100 and something US dollars, up to some speculative blighters are asking for 300 plus for these. Not in fantastic condition either. This was a $50 watch when it was new, much like the Duro. Dimensions then, oddly enough, it's a 40-20, 40mm diameter, 20mm lug width, but because it's quartz, it is super slim at 10.5mm. Drilled lugs, which is a nice, neat touch you don't see on many Casios these days, 48mm lug to lug. There is a bit of a taper down to about 17.5, back up to 19 at the clasp, and sized up for Phil, but it fits me as well, 117 grams. So it is a nice, neat watch on wrist, certainly a lot lighter than your average automatic Submariner homage, such as the two that I flashed in earlier on. All stainless steel case, crown, bezel and bracelet, and the mixture of brushing and polishing is exactly what you'd expect from a Submariner alike, i.e. slab-sided with polish and brushing on those lugs. The lug brushing though is pretty rough. I'll pop in some macro here of a side-by-side next to the Invicta Pro Diver, a watch which has notoriously rough lug brushing, and the MTD 1010 is much rougher. They would need to do something about that, I suspect, if they want to reissue this one. Now, the bezel itself is 60 click unidirectional. The action is fine with a loom pip up there at the 60. The bracelet is a slight departure from a 3-link oyster style, and you'll note that slightly inverted mid-link of the end link. It wears very nicely, this one, as a consequence of that. They are proper separate links, but they are unfortunately just rolled links. As I said, this was a $50 watch back in the day, so I wouldn't expect anything else. Pretty basic clasp here with a fold over and 4 micro adjusts pressed. Again, just what you'd expect for $50. Dial and hands. Now, I'd rate Phil's watch at maybe a 7 out of 10 used condition. There's certainly a few scratches and scrapes on the mineral crystal and a few nicks and cuts in that aluminium bezel insert as well. But overall, you get the idea from this one example. Yeah, very Rolex alike, but because this is a 20-year-old design, it's not the new maxi dial that they're copying. So all of those circular indices, the batons and the triangle at 12 are a bit smaller than you would expect from a Rolex Submariner homage today. Classic Mercedes handset, as one would expect, and a date complication at the 3 o'clock, but no Cyclops. The date's actually nice and legible as it is, with a small printed surround. Casio quartz printed under the triangle at 12, and water resist 100 meters printed above the baton at 6. Japan movement printed beneath the baton at 6. Minute track around the outer edge, no surprises from this one whatsoever. And it wears very neatly on my 7-inch wrist, 10.5mm thick I think is a big reason for that, as is the relative lightweight compared to comparable automatic models. And legibility is excellent. It's not a big watch, but is nice and readable from most angles. Overall then, a neat and tidy little watch, this one. I understand why they charge for a premium now. I'd imagine if you bought one of these for $50 back in the day, you are pretty pleased with yourself and you've had many, many years of good service out of this watch. I think the relative slimness is a big advantage, as is the lack of weight. It brings something different to all of the other Submariner homages that I have reviewed plenty of on the channel. I tend to focus on autos, but there's no reason I don't think why a quartz one wouldn't do the job just as well. So that's the basics then. Let's bring in a few different watches to do some side-by-side comparisons, starting with the Duro. And look at the difference when I place the 44mm Duro next to the 40mm 1010. It rather dwarfs it. I mean, the lug-to-lug difference isn't huge. I measure this one at 48 and this one at about 49.5, but yeah, it is a vastly different experience wearing one of these on wrist. Now, I have modded this Duro. It has a sapphire crystal and a stainless steel aftermarket bracelet. I guess the Duro has the advantage of a screw-down crown and 200 meters water resistance. I would see that as the minimum these days. I would think people would expect a screw-down crown from the 1010 if it was ever reissued. Bezel action of the Duro is vastly superior as well. This one rather showing its age in terms of the overall manufacturing. But yeah, the biggest difference, I guess, is the size. Now here it is next to the JDM watch that I hinted at in the intro. I bought this, it's the MTV 100D. I bought it from Japan early last year, actually got delayed by the pandemic. Japan Post were just not sending anything out, but I thought it might be that slightly smaller Marlin that we were all looking for, but as you can see there, it still has the stickers. Let me just do that properly. There we are. It arrived and I just wasn't all that impressed with it. It wasn't quite what I was looking for anyway. Nicely finished, but a lot of bezel and not a lot of dial, and 42mm and actually quite thick. So it wasn't the kind of small version of the Duro that I thought perhaps it could be. But 200 meters of water resistance and a screw down crown, yeah, I think that has become almost mandatory in today's market. And there it is next to the Invicta Pro Diver, sharing very, very similar looks overall. The Pro Diver's been around for a long time now, and as such it copies the older style dial and case patterning of the Rolex Submariner. It hasn't grown like the Sub has over the last 10 years or so. One interesting comparison though, I did a lume comparison between the MTT 1010 in the middle, the Invicta Pro Diver on the left, and the Casio Duro on the right. The MTD 1010, despite being by far the oldest watch of the three, had by far the best lume. You can see initially that it's going to be the standout, and when I crank the speed up, it is confirmed. After 10 minutes or so, the other two are basically gone, whereas the older watch is still hanging on in there. One of the big criticisms about the Duro is that the lume isn't really good enough. This proves that Casio used to do it better than they do it today. So should Casio bring back the 1010, and would it sell if they did bring it back? Well, I guess that depends on whether they made any specification changes and improvements to it between now and then, and also crucially what they priced it at. I definitely think there would be a market for a smaller version of the Duro, even if it wasn't quite identical. Like I said, a push-pull crown, people would prefer 200 meters of water resistance and a screw-in crown if they could retain some of that slimness and the lightness that is inherent in this design as opposed to some other similar sized watches. Regarding the whole Submariner homage thing, yeah, well, they still sell in enormous numbers, so I don't see that being a big problem. And I think the strength of the Casio brand goes some way to offset the now perhaps slightly over familiar looks that this watch would have. But there is, of course, a middle path. There is an alternative that would cover all bases and satisfy everyone. And that, of course, would be to keep some of the looks of the 106, but transfer them over to the 1010 case and overall size. They could shrink down that handset a little bit, I'm sure, keep that signature red tip, move over the double index, just distance this one from the Submariner a little bit more, give it a bit of its own identity. Look, either way, if they just went for a straight re-release with a few different upgrades, or they tried to hybridize these and give a kind of similar case with its own identity, I'm sure there would be a market for it. That's what I think anyway. But what do you think? Leave me a comment. Are you over the whole Submariner lookalike, or would you be all right with it because it was a Casio? Let me know your thoughts. I look forward to reading them. So there you have it. Congratulations for making it all the way to the back end of the video. I hope they bring this one back with the few tweaks that I mentioned. If you're into your Casios, be sure to check out my full re-review of the Duro or my perfect beater, the solar powered Square 5600. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all soon.